knows everything about the Buckeyes. He's been offered tens of dollars by a certain team to spill his secrets. He's told that certain team to go to hell.
Damn you all to hell!
He's Austin Ward.
Indeed he is, and he's part of The Beat with the great Jeremy Birmingham, 10 TV Plus. Joins on the Brian Heating Cooling Systems fan guest hotline. 9:30 on a Friday, huh? That's when we're going to do this thing, bud?
Yeah, what do we call that in our industry, Beau? A little news dump?
That's extreme.
Normally you do that at like 5 o'clock,
right,
and you hit send, and then you punch out for the weekend. They waited until 9:30, and then they all decided to pat themselves on the back without really acknowledging the fact that this doesn't preclude future lawsuits. So not everything has been solved, but as you and I have talked about on a number of Mondays for as long as we've been doing this, at least this is a step in the right direction, that they are acknowledging that the universities and the athletic departments can and should and will be paying the players. But then the other thing that we always talk about when it comes to rules and regulations and guardrails is that eventually they're going to need the players to be able to collectively bargain, to sign contracts. So I'm going to neatly sum all that up into one, while also saying it was pretty disappointing the way that they rolled it out on Friday night.
I said this in the first hour, buddy. I don't want to be flip with this because this is historic. We are going to pay college athletes. So that's never happened above board from the universities before. We've been doing the NAL thing for a while, and it happened under the table for years. But this is now salary. So I don't want to be flip with that this isn't anything, because it's definitely something, to your point. Let's do this from the football perspective, because that's 99.9% of the things that you and I discuss. If you're Ryan Day, and now all of a sudden you're going to be able to compensate your players, and it's this, I saw reporting this morning, $18 million, it sounds like it's going to be split up among however it goes. Ohio State currently has more men's sports scholarship than Texas has total sports. If you're Ryan Day, how can you operate in a world, or you have to be certain that you operate in a world where everyone on your roster makes what Texas's guys make, right? I mean, that's got to be his concern.
It is, and it's Mark Pantoni's concern, and it's Ross Bjork's concern, and I think in some ways the NIL Go piece of this is so that they can all monitor each other, and that they don't get in secret backdoor bidding competitions that they're not in, or that the players can play off of against each other, and that they might be able to get some more information. That's sort of an offshoot out of what you're talking about. But I think that the thing that has stood in everyone's way from progress with college football specifically, but college athletics as a whole, is first this notion that you needed to pay the players, and then second, that they view everyone as competition off the field, and that they don't work collaboratively when it comes time to sit down for broadcast deals or NIL situations or roster salary caps, roster scholarship numbers. Part of the issue that we had in the build-up to Friday night's agreement with the House settlement was that you had schools arguing over how many players needed to be on a roster, how many scholarships could count, could you grandfather them in. They were still fighting and arguing and bickering over that until the very last minute. So this becomes the next challenge. It's not a new one. Ohio State and Ryan Day were having to pay attention to all of that before when it came to distribution of the salary cap and trying to work with the collectives as much was allowed within the rules, and how much other programs were paying attention to that. I can't really speak to it, but this is another thing. It's another reason why Mark Pantoni needed the raise that he needed, because he's got another piece of responsibility on his plate to manage with that part, and it's going to only become more difficult. The conversations are going to be more challenging when you spread around that money, and the truth is, for the best rosters in college football, that 18 to 20 million is not going to be enough anyway. So the fun is truly just beginning with this, Beau. As I said, if they wanted to take a victory lap on Friday night, by all means do that. They did accomplish something significant, but they are nowhere near done with this process.
No, and I think it literally is, as I was reading it on the show, buddy, every sentence, I couldn't even really get through a sentence without saying, yeah, but what about this?
Yeah.
But what about this? And what about that? And it's that part of it's never ending. And as you mentioned, the fact that they could continue to litigate going forward. The other thing that I think is just crazy about this is, so you're going to have this new czar that is going to try to administer all of this, but with what army is he going to investigate, and who's going to be the one to enforce it? So I'm very dubious to think that anything is going to get done on that side of things. The other thing that's pretty crazy was, so this is the number that $22 million that they came up with. That was average revenue of all Division I. We're still living in this world where, like, Ohio State and I'll use your beloved Wyoming Cowboys, where they're operating under the same rules. These two things are not similar.
They're not, and I like to use Wyoming as that example as well, because I know what their financial situation is. I know how much they're going to contribute to their roster, and frankly, they can't afford to compete in the same in any sport really as Ohio State. We've all lauded college basketball as well. The Mountain West Conference can compete with the Big Ten, the SEC, because the size of the roster is small. If that's what you choose to spend it on, well, fine. That may or may not be true, but college football is certainly not an apples to apples comparison between those programs. And it's how we get down this road where we're fantasy booking, super conferences and promotion and relegation. And none of that is a real solution for it either. And having a college sports commissioner czar, whatever, that's not going to solve it either, because as you mentioned, when it comes to subpoena power or investigative power, they're not going to have that. This group is probably more limited, in all honesty, than what the NCAA had as the Committee on Infractions wrapped up its work over the weekend with some intrigue for the rivalry there to go forward and see what happens there. But I think they actually had a greater chance of instituting those rules in the NCAA model. Now we'll see if I'm proven correct on that with the CSC, because it doesn't feel like it is designed for anything other than the financial aspect of college athletics and college football more specifically, which there's no problem with that. But in terms of like on-field rules and regulations, their hands are probably a bit more tied than they actually were before.
Do you think Michigan's going to get hit pretty good here?
I do. I think they have to. Some of this is my own opinion, and some of this is also just conversation with other college football coaches, assistant coaches, athletic directors across the country. I think in general, the more casual, quote unquote, college football fan has checked out on this. The games happened for Michigan. They won the national championship. Yeah, it was a silly punchline. They've moved on. That's certainly not the case in Ann Arbor, where they are fighting tooth and nail to avoid punishment. And I don't think that that's the case in Columbus, where they were more directly impacted by this than anybody else. So, but when it comes to an integrity of the game situation, this is not hamburgers, not recruiting inducements, not NIL. This was cheating of the game itself. You look around, coaches and players are way more outraged about this than maybe again the casual fan. And I don't mean that in a negative term, but the ones that aren't paying as close attention to it or didn't know that Michigan was in front of the Committee on Infractions over the weekend, they probably don't care. But I think everyone seems to have some level of agreement that what would be most fair is a postseason ban this year, because going back and stripping them of the championship is not going to do anything. Stripping the record books of the wins is not going to do anything. And I've said this to you a number of times. I believe, and many other people believe, that it's got to be forward-facing. And when people use the argument of, well, the current players weren't part of that, it doesn't matter. They're free to leave. The program itself, lack of institutional control. Michigan, the body, has to feel it. And the players, if they don't want to stick through that process for a year the way the 2012 Buckeyes did, so be it. But that cannot be a concern in handing out this punishment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I am curious I'm curious if Tony Petitti is upright, because we never see him. He can release statements, but we never see him say anything. But also, can the Big Ten afford for Michigan to fall off the cliff? Because I don't think that it can, honestly, buddy. I think you need Michigan with Ohio State to carry this. You think about Big Noon and all of that stuff. They're dependent on Michigan being real.
Yeah, and
which is brutal, that part of it.
And that's why I don't know, because we hear so infrequently from Tony Petitti. We've got like 6 weeks until he gives his State of the Big Ten address in Vegas.
Right.
I guess that'll be the next time we hear from him. That this would be a true test of that. I thought Tony Petitti was pretty, like, Michigan was threatening lawsuits when he suspended Jim Harbaugh for 3 games 2 years ago, and he didn't back down from that. So even though he seems largely beholden to the financial interests and the broadcast partners, I think he's mostly done what is right for the rest of the constituents in the league. And all 17 of them, I think, agree that if you have to sacrifice a little bit of prestige for Michigan on the field this year in the greater good of college football, that's what they would like to see done. And Ohio State games in 2012, they still drew really good ratings, and they provided a good story and went undefeated. We all know that here. I don't think Michigan has a team that's capable of doing that, but there would still be enough, I think, storyline-wise with Michigan. If they roll with Underwood, I think people would still be paying attention anyway throughout the regular season, and they could try and play spoiler in a bunch of situations, and that people would tune in for that. I'm not saying that you give them a death penalty. I'm not saying you don't let them play out the season, but the postseason is going to have to move on without them.
Good talk as always, buddy. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate you both. See ya.
All right, there he goes. Austin Ward with The Beat with Jeremy Birmingham on 10 TV Plus, joining on the Bryant Heating and Cooling Systems fan guest hotline.